The storm breaks. Admiral Marcus Raynor stared at the monitor, his jaw clenched tight. His eyes flicked across the holographic display of Earth's defense grid, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The sudden surge of activity, military satellites scrambling, missiles being fired, ships mobilizing, had thrown everything into chaos. For the first time in his career, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Earth was on the brink of something far worse than he'd ever anticipated. The alarms blared, sharp and insistent. A cold voice crackled through the intercom, the sound carrying the urgency of the moment. "Admiral Raynor, we're detecting a massive fleet, bearing down on Earth. Multiple unknown signatures. They're coming in fast." Raynor exhaled slowly, his fingers grazing the edges of his command chair. "Unknown signatures? Are you sure?" "We've never seen anything like this before, sir," the technician replied, his voice trembling with fear. "We've matched their trajectory with the coordinates of the Draxian Empire. But their fleet, there's something different about it." A shiver ran down Raynor's spine. The Draxians. The empire that had been quietly observing Earth for years, but never openly threatening. He had always believed humanity was safe, at least for now. But this was something else entirely. "Deploy all fleets to intercept," Raynor ordered, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. "Activate all planetary defenses. I want every gun pointed at those ships." "Understood, Admiral," came the crisp reply. As the orders echoed through the command center, Raynor moved with purpose, striding over to the massive viewport that looked out over Earth's atmosphere. A soft glow bathed the planet below. Earth, his home. His people. His responsibility. The fleet was massive, more than Raynor had ever seen in his lifetime. He knew they were coming, he'd expected conflict sooner or later. But the sheer magnitude of this attack was something else. The Draxians were not known for their subtlety, and they certainly weren't going to send a fleet of this size just to make a statement. "Admiral," a voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to face Lieutenant Mira Thorpe, his second-in-command. Her brow was furrowed, eyes scanning her terminal with a focused intensity. "We've received an encrypted transmission from their lead vessel. It's strange. No communication like we've ever seen before." Raynor nodded. "Play it." Mira hesitated, then hit a series of keys on her console. The room fell into a tense silence as the transmission flickered to life on the screen. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, his features partially obscured by a large, ornate helmet. His voice, when it came, was deep and cold, echoing throughout the command center. "This is Emperor Vakthar of the Draxian Empire. We come not as invaders, but as liberators. Your planet's resistance is futile. Surrender now, and you will be spared. Fight, and your annihilation will be swift and complete." The transmission cut off abruptly. The room was deathly silent. Raynor's mind raced, processing the words. They came not to conquer, at least not in the way most would. It was a threat, yes, but one that echoed with arrogance. The Draxian Empire had made a terrible miscalculation. They were here to destroy, yes, but also to humiliate. They were going to make humanity bend to their will. "We're not surrendering," Raynor muttered to himself, his fists tightening at his sides. Mira spoke quietly. "What's the plan, Admiral?" Raynor turned to her, his gaze steady. "We'll fight them with everything we have." The tactical display on the large wall screen updated in real time, showing incoming ships, each one appearing as tiny dots at first, then growing larger and more ominous as they neared. The Draxians weren't wasting any time. The scale of the fleet was beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Hundreds of warships, each more advanced than anything in the UEDF arsenal. It was a nightmare scenario. His eyes flicked back to the screen as the first wave of Draxian ships made their move, sending salvo after salvo of heavy plasma fire toward Earth's orbital defense grid. The lights in the room flickered as the shock waves of the attacks rippled through the station's hull. "Deploy the fleet. Initiate defense protocols," Raynor barked. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of the crisis. Target their lead ships. Hit them hard and fast. Admiral Rayner had planned for this. Not exactly this scale, but he had prepared for war. The Draxians had been a looming threat for years. But no one, not even Rayner, could have predicted just how quickly the battle would unfold. The screen flickered as Earth's own fleet of destroyers, cruisers, and interceptors moved into formation. Rayner's mind worked at a breakneck pace, processing tactical information, assessing the battlefield. His officers moved with military precision, their own training kicking in as they followed his commands without hesitation. Outside the station's hull, the battle raged. Rayner could see it all through the massive windows, the sparkling dots of distant ships exchanging fire in a deadly dance of light and destruction. Earth's fleet moved in tight, disciplined formations, their tactics honed through years of war games, simulations, and preparation. But this was real. The Draxians had the upper hand. Their ships were advanced, bristling with weapons and shields far beyond anything the UEDF could match. It was a war of attrition, and right now, the Draxians held the advantage. Focus on their flanks, Rayner commanded, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. We need to hit them where they're weakest. Keep their forces distracted while we coordinate a counterattack. We're going to need every last ship in this fight. Mira nodded, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls. Sir, we've detected a breach in the northwestern sector. They're making a push toward Earth's atmosphere. We can't afford to let them get past our defenses. Rayner's eyes narrowed. Then we stop them before they get any closer. Prepare the heavy artillery. We'll need every weapon to slow them down. I won't let them land on Earth. The room hummed with activity as the fleet rallied, Earth's military forces holding steady against an enemy that was now unleashing everything they had. Rayner's thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear, Earth had no choice but to win. There was no room for error. His people were counting on him. The battle was just beginning, but Marcus Rayner had never been one to shy away from a challenge. Prepare for impact, he muttered under his breath, watching the Draxian ships grow ever closer. We're going to make them regret underestimating us. As the fleet moved into formation, the first waves of Draxian fire began to rain down on Earth's defenses. The war for the planet had begun. The unseen hand. The darkness of space was alive with fire and fury. Outside Earth's orbit, the Draxian fleet moved as one, a massive wall of destruction, moving inexorably toward their target. Their ships were like shadows, vast and looming, with glowing energy weapons flashing from their bellies in sharp bursts of light. The fleet's firepower was devastating, more than any human force had ever faced. Yet, Marcus Rayner's resolve did not falter. This was his planet, his people, and he would fight for them, no matter the cost. Inside the UEDF flagship Vanguard, the tension was palpable. The bridge was a whirlwind of activity, officers barking orders, technicians monitoring data streams, and the hum of communication channels echoing through the metal walls. Rayner stood at the center, his eyes glued to the battle unfolding in real time on the massive holoscreen that dominated the room. Sir, Mira Thorpe's voice sliced through the chaos, we're losing communication with the outer defense stations. Their relays are being jammed, and our fleets are struggling to maintain formation. Rayner didn't flinch. He'd known this could happen. The Draxians were notorious for their technological prowess, and their ability to disrupt communications was one of their most lethal tactics. He strode over to Myra's console, his boots clanking against the metal floor with every step. Do we have any backup channels? He asked, his voice steady. We're working on it, she replied, her fingers flying across the keys. But their jamming is sophisticated. It's almost as if they're using something more advanced than anything we've encountered. Rayner gritted his teeth, the weight of command bearing down on him. The Draxians were throwing everything they had at Earth, but what troubled him most was the sense that they were planning something even worse. A direct assault wasn't their only goal. There was a deeper strategy at play, and he needed to understand it before it was too late. Admiral, a new voice interrupted his thoughts, Lieutenant Carter, a young officer with a sharp mind. He looked up from his station, his face drawn with concern. We've detected a second wave. It's not just Draxian warships. There are dropships, dozens of them. They're moving towards Earth's surface. Troops? Rayner asked, his voice cold with realization. He couldn't let them get a foothold. Earth had to remain untouchable. Most likely, Carter confirmed. But their signatures are odd. We've never seen anything like this before. What do you mean, odd? Rayner's patience was wearing thin, but he knew Carter was thorough. Their ships are nearly invisible to our scanners. We can barely detect them, let alone track their landing zones. Rayner turned, his eyes narrowing as he weighed his options. Is there a way to pinpoint their exact landing locations? We're working on it, sir, Carter said. But it's going to take time. Rayner knew time was something they didn't have. Earth was already under attack, and now the Draxians were landing troops, elite forces, no doubt. He had to act quickly. Mira, he called, turning toward his second-in-command. I want you to mobilize a counterstrike force. We'll hit those dropships before they can land. She nodded, her expression grim. Understood. Without another word, she turned and began barking orders to the other officers, her voice cutting through the noise of the bridge. Rayner turned back to the holoscreen, his mind racing. The first wave of Draxian warships was already engaged with Earth's fleet. The battle was fierce, but humanity's forces were holding their ground. However, this was just the opening salvo. The true test would come when the Draxian forces touched down on Earth. Rayner's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden vibration that shook the entire ship. His body tensed as the Vanguard lurched forward, an impact shaking it to its core. Report, he barked, gripping the edge of the command chair to steady himself. Direct hit, sir, came the voice of one of the crew. The Draxians just launched an EMP wave from one of their capital ships. Our systems are offline, temporarily, sir. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. An EMP attack was a devastating tactic, one that could cripple their defenses and turn the tide of the entire battle. It wasn't just the ships that were affected, the EMP would have impacted Earth's orbital defense grid as well, making it vulnerable to further attacks. Get our systems back online now, Rayner snapped, his voice an iron command. I don't care what it takes. His mind raced as the crew scrambled to regain control of the ship. Without communications, they were blind. Without weapons, they were defenseless. If the Draxians pushed forward now, Earth would be helpless. For a moment, the bridge was silent, the tension thick and suffocating. Then, a voice from one of the communications officers broke through the silence. Admiral, the officer said, his voice shaking. We've regained limited control. We're receiving a transmission, Draxian frequency. Rayner's heart skipped a beat. The Draxians weren't just attacking, they were toying with them, trying to break them mentally and physically. Play it, Rayner ordered, his voice cold and clipped. The transmission flickered to life on the holoscreen, and once again, the dark figure of Emperor Vokther emerged. His voice, however, had changed. There was no longer the cold arrogance from before. Instead, there was something more ominous in his tone, something that sent a chill through Rayner's bones. You humans are resilient, I'll give you that, Vokther said, his voice now dripping with disdain. But your time is over. We have not come to conquer. We have come to end your species, once and for all. Your resistance is futile, Admiral Rayner. There is no victory for you here. Rayner's fists clenched at his sides. We will never surrender, he growled, though he knew the Draxian Emperor could not hear him. Vokther's image flickered for a moment, as though he was considering his next words. Oh, but you already have, Admiral. Your people have already made their choice. You've chosen to die. The transmission ended, leaving a foreboding silence in its wake. Rayner stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the blank screen. His mind was working furiously, calculating their next move. The Draxians believed they had the upper hand. They thought humanity would break. But they hadn't accounted for one thing. Humanity would never break. Lieutenant, Rayner said, his voice low but filled with an unyielding strength. Get our fleet back online. Prepare to launch a full-scale counterattack. And get me the coordinates for those dropships. We're taking this fight to them. We will make them regret underestimating us. The silence on the bridge was thick with resolve. The battle for Earth was far from over, and Marcus Rayner would not let his people fall without a fight. The last stand. The Vanguard moved through space like a wounded beast, its engines sputtering in the wake of the Draxian EMP blast. Despite the temporary setback, Rayner's resolve was ironclad. The bridge hummed with activity as the crew scrambled to restore full functionality to the ship. Tactical officers worked furiously, rerouting power to critical systems, while engineering teams fought to bring the weapons online. Time was short. The Draxians were already on the move. Sir, the first wave of enemy dropships is entering Earth's atmosphere. Carter, the young officer, reported with urgency. His face was pale, eyes wide with barely contained panic. They're heading for key military zones. Rayner's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on him, and yet he remained calm. His mind, sharp and focused, was already calculating their next move. Earth's survival depended on this. Deploy the ground forces, Rayner commanded, his voice steady despite the rising tension. We need to stop them before they can establish a foothold. A brief nod from Mira signaled the beginning of their counterattack. Earth's remaining fleet, though weakened by the EMP, was still formidable. Rayner had a plan in place, one that he believed could turn the tide. The first priority was cutting off the Draxian ground forces from their objective. The second was taking down their supply chain, ensuring they couldn't reinforce their invasion. On the holoscreen, the remains of Earth's military forces were scattered across the battlefield. Rayner stared at the disarray, his fingers pressing against the metal of the command chair. They couldn't afford to hesitate. They had one chance to stop the Draxian assault, and he intended to take it. Admiral, Mira spoke, her voice tight, we've just detected an unusual energy surge from the Draxian capital ship. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. Rayner's brows furrowed. What kind of surge? Mira checked her screen again. It appears they're charging a weapon, something capable of planetary-scale destruction. Sir, it could be their final move. Rayner's blood ran cold. If the Draxians unleashed that weapon, it could obliterate Earth, wiping out their forces in a single strike. His mind raced. They had to stop the capital ship before that weapon could fire. Carter, I need a fleet to engage that ship, now. Rayner barked. Already on it, sir. Carter replied, his fingers flying across the terminal. Fleet communications are back online. We're launching a full strike. Seconds turned to minutes as Rayner watched the movements of the fleet unfold before him. He could see the human ships, a mix of tactical cruisers, smaller gunships, and heavy bombardment vessels, all aligning for a head-on assault against the massive Draxian ship. The odds were grim, but if they managed to take down the capital ship, they could cripple the Draxian invasion. But there was no time to waste. Rayner's eyes shifted to the ground forces report. The first wave of dropships had touched down, tens of thousands of Draxian soldiers were now on Earth's soil. They were heading for key military sites, the capital, major weapons depots, and defense command centers. If they managed to take these locations, it would give the Draxians a foothold on Earth that would be nearly impossible to dislodge. Captain Hughes, Rayner called, prepare the 1st and 2nd Infantry for immediate deployment. We can't let them capture those sites. Aye, sir. We're ready to deploy, Captain Hughes replied with determination. Rayner turned his attention back to the battle map. The human forces had already started moving to intercept the Draxian ground forces. It was a race against time. Earth's survival depended on those soldiers on the ground holding their ground. A loud explosion rumbled through the ship, shaking the Vanguard. The hull groaned under the pressure, but the crew held steady, used to the chaos of war. We've got incoming, sir. Carter yelled, his voice tinged with fear. Draxian reinforcements just arrived, tens of thousands more troops. Raynor's gaze hardened. The Draxians were relentless. They would overwhelm Earth's forces unless something drastic changed. Status on the fleet, he asked Mira. The fleet is engaging the Draxian capital ship. We've launched a full assault, but it's a battle of attrition. Their ship is heavily armored, Mira explained, her fingers tapping rapidly on the controls. We need to focus on breaking through their defenses or we won't stand a chance. Raynor's eyes narrowed, a thought sparking in his mind. He stood, pacing back and forth as he considered their next move. Mira, I need you to transmit coordinates for their weak points. If we can crack their armor, we stand a chance at disabling their weapon. Mira nodded, already inputting data. I'm on it, sir. Seconds later, the feed flashed with new information. The Draxian capital ship had exposed its vulnerable belly, a perfect opening for a concentrated strike. It was a slim window of opportunity, but it was all they had. Launch all heavy bombers, target the weak points, Raynor commanded, his voice low and determined. The crew moved quickly, and Raynor couldn't help but feel the tension in the air as the first wave of bombers launched from the vanguard. The massive warplanes sped toward the Draxian ship, their weapons primed, targeting the underbelly of the enemy vessel. The seconds stretched into eternity. On the holoscreen, he could see the bombers racing toward their target, flares of bright energy streaking across the dark void of space. Then, a series of explosions lit up the Draxian capital ship. It rocked, its engines sputtering as massive chunks of debris were blown off into space. We did it! Mira exclaimed, her face lighting up with triumph. But Raynor didn't celebrate. He knew the battle was far from over. The Draxians would regroup and launch a counterattack. This was only the first round. Captain Hughes, we need those ground forces to move faster. The longer we wait, the more reinforcements the Draxians will send, Raynor urged. Aye, sir. We're pushing them back now. We've got squads taking out their comms relays to prevent them from calling reinforcements, Hughes replied. The capital's under heavy fire, but we're holding strong. Raynor nodded, but his mind remained focused on the Draxian capital ship. Despite the damage, it was still operational, and its planetary weapon was still a threat. Do whatever it takes to take that ship down, he ordered, his voice ice-cold. This battle will be over the moment it fires again. The ground forces and fleet were engaged in full combat now. Humanity had fought back with everything they had, but this battle was only the beginning. And for Marcus Raynor, the cost of victory would be more than he was prepared to bear. The question now was simple: could they defeat the Draxians before they could strike Earth with their final blow? The fate of humanity rested in the balance.